And good afternoon, everyone out there in internet land and on the web and in your homes, because nobody's ever out anymore. I don't even know where out is, but we're going to discover it again. It hasn't gone away. It's still there. This is Yvonne DeVita with Smart Conversations, and we've got some sun here in downtown Binghamton. And I don't even live in downtown Binghamton, but that's okay. I always like to talk about it. Today, I have a really, really special guest, and he's one of my BFFs from the days before anybody knew what a BFF was. His name is Paul Chaney. Paul, thank you. Thank you and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I hate that Brad Pitt's published this didn't get back to you, but I'm happy to be a stand-in for him. So,
well, you are the perfect stand-in if you ask me. Other than a little bit off at the top of the up here, you'll look exactly like Brad Pitt.
Oh yeah, well, people tell me that all the time, and if you believe that, I have some property just off the coast of Florida. I'm happy to.
Oh, okay. Well, listen, I want to tell people a little bit more about you because we have stayed in touch over the years, and I'm never going to say how many years those are. But we're both like still doing the same thing, but doing something different and all that kind of stuff. So let me just tell everyone a little bit more about you. Paul is a freelance writer, editor, and digital marketer. And altogether, he has more than 25 years of digital marketing experience. That is really impressive, Paul. 25 years. I mean, digital marketing has only been around about 25 years. He's the co-author of 4 books that cover the topics of social media, social commerce, and business blogging. He also served as technical editor of many of Wiley's For Dummies books. Let's see, you did internet marketing there, search engine optimization, pay-per-click, WordPress, and blogging. All of the things that are still today very, very much the social scene. He also represented the American Marketing Association as a social media marketing workshop instructor. He worked with the Knowledge Engineers, a UK-based marketing consultancy teaching social media marketing to major advertising agencies. They need it. They still need it, Paul. You should still be doing that. And he had the privilege of working with the United States Department of Commerce to conduct social media marketing workshops in Ukraine. I'm like, so Paul, everybody out there, have you been kind of stumbling along, especially the last year that we've all been more or less stuck in our houses, trying to make this whole social thing work? Well, maybe you should be talking to Paul. Paul, give me a little hint of your work in the books that you've either written or contributed to.
Oh, well, I have to go back then to the initial book, which was Realty Blogging, published in 2006 by McGraw-Hill. I was working with a startup that was a blogging platform startup focused on the real estate industry. And we were at the National Association of Realtors conference or convention in 2005 in San Francisco at the Moscone Center. I think that's how you pronounce it. And we had our little booth in the whole big Expo area. And about 2 rows away, McGraw-Hill had their booth, and they had all these real estate books. Well, a lady walks over to me and asks if I'd be interested in writing a book about blogging, because that was our technology platform we were doing, focused on the real estate industry. Mm-hmm. Now, what she did, it turns out she was an acquisition editor, but what she didn't know was that I had already written a proposal for Jossie Bass for a book on business blogging, and had, at their request, and had pitched that to them. I hadn't heard back from them at that point, but I thought, well, I'm here at this booth at the behest of the company's founder, Richard Knott, and he's not here at the time. So I called Richard, and I felt like it would only be fair. And I said, Richard, you want to write a book on real estate blogging? And he said, of course, yes, because he saw it as a, business development opportunity. I saw it as an opportunity to get my name on a book.
Yeah.
So out of that came Realty Blogging. The next book that came along was one that was written in 2009 called The Digital Handshake. That was done with Wiley.
The Digital Handshake.
Sure.
Pull it up.
Okay. Hang on one second.
Yeah, because we can't see it. It was getting blurred. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of shiny cover. They were really proud of that. Now, I would have titled the book Social Media for Small Business, and I think it probably would have sold better. But this is from Wiley. And the story behind that book was I was already working with Wiley on technical editing on For Dummies books. Okay. And so, we kind of had a little bit of relationship. And so we began talking about this book. And David Meerman Scott, I was at a conference in Foxborough in 2008. David Meerman Scott said to me, no, this doesn't need to be in the whatever the For Dummies series of books is, whatever you call that. He said it needed to be more in the sort of the trade publication side of things. Standing there was one of the Wiley editors who said, yeah, I agree. And so that's how the book came to be. Now I still had to write, the marketing proposal and do all of that stuff. But they basically, I was welcomed into their...
Sure, they pitched it. They wanted you. Why wouldn't they? So the marketing proposal, tell me about writing that.
Well, that's a very arduous thing, as you probably are very familiar with. I mean, basically, let's face it, a traditional publisher, what's their interest? Selling books is their interest. And they need to know that you can sell a certain amount of books in order for them to be profitable, right? So the marketing proposal and the whole thing has to do with, what makes your book different than others on the market? Why is it needed on the market? Who's your audience for the books? What other titles are out there that may speak to that same audience? How many volumes of this book do you think you can sell? And, what's your cachet? What's your sort of network, networking, communities of practice that you're a part of? Do you have speaking engagements lined up? All of that stuff goes into them knowing that this book is going to be worth their while. Of course, obviously, things work out one way or the other in terms of that, but that's kind of what that's all about. And of course, typically they want you to have a chapter, representative chapter written, and not usually the first one, but an interior chapter, as well as the whole scope of the book lined out, right? Your thesis, purpose of the book, your audience has already talked about, a chapter sort of by chapter breakdown. So you need to give them all of that before they say yes. And then of course, hopefully you get a decent advance on the book and such. And then maybe if you're lucky, you get some royalties out of it after the fact. But it really, and I think the truth of this is, they're going to make sure you get in the bookstores, assuming anything other than Amazon still exists. And that's about it. Unless you're, you're a proven author with them, you've got a track record with them. I think of somebody like a Brian Solis, for example. Brian's a great guy, and he's done really well by Wiley. So perhaps there's some promotional efforts on their part for him, but a fledgling like me, it was pretty much on my back, my burden to market this book. And, to one degree or another, I hopefully, stepped up to do it.
Well, you really have created quite a bit. I mean, the books that the Realty Blogging, I'm really interested in that, even though it's from 2005, because I can remember probably 2006 or 7 thinking that more realtors should blog. And when we were in Colorado, our realtor, we moved 3 times while we were in Colorado, when we were only there for 9 years. Oh, well. And I used to try and get her to blog. And towards the end, we were discussing doing a video blog because she was really good at that. But, you have all this background, this writing. So because we were there at the beginning, like 2005, because you had these experiences, and let's just put out there, Paul, that these experiences didn't just happen. You know, I know that you went to conferences and you met people and you built relationships. And like you said, David
Merriman,
was
yeah.
there and all of that. And that's one of the things that I want other people to understand. I want the audience to understand that none of this happened by magic. That you were not necessarily, you didn't sit home and say, so I'm going to become an author and I'm going to write these 4 books, but you were there, the right place at the right time.
Well, let me give you a little bit of backstory. So in 2004, I got fired from a job and went through a divorce all in the same month. Basically.
Wow.
So it was bad time, right? Late 2004, really bad time. So I went to this counselor that had been recommended to me. And the very first session, he said 2 things that transformed my life, my attitude, and my whole approach to things. He said, first of all, the only tense is future. Past is past. Yeah, you can learn from it, but you can't live in it, because I kind of was trying to, you know. He said the present tense is like an arrow in flight. If you reach up to grab it, it's already gone. So that leaves the future. And the second thing he said was, there are 2 ways to deal with the future. One is you can sit back, let it come to you, you know, passively, let it come to you, do with you what it will, or you can proactively reach out and try to shape your future into what you want it to be. And while I'm not a big law of attraction kind of guy, I did believe that, you know, if I went in the direction that my heart was leading me, things would happen. And oh boy, did they. And while 2004 was a lousy year, 2005 was an incredible year where the doors opened. I had to step into a new career in a sense. I went out on my own the first time. It's 3 times altogether now. And, you know, book opportunity came, speaking opportunities came, working with Richard in the startup came. And then, you know, just sort of the rest of the story has been told. And while I think there have been times when I've sort of stepped back away from that sort of philosophy, I've tried to step back into it. And I find that, you know, my whole experience with getting published is so atypical, because I never really reached out, never had a, you know, what do you call it, a publicist or anybody like that to represent me. Generally, it was people coming to me, you know, giving me the opportunity, the invitation. Now I had to seize that, you know, and do my best to take advantage of it. But I never had to do a lot of what, you know, many authors are faced with doing.
Well, when we look at that story and you seize the opportunity, there's an important part that you're leaving out. You brought the experience and the knowledge, and you gained that by studying and learning. And I mean, it's not like we suddenly woke up one day and said, we're going to be digital marketers, we're going to be bloggers, and everybody's going to come to our blog, and then people are going to ask us to write books. No, what happened is, somewhere along the line, this spoke to you, the doors opened. I really like that part of the story. I really like that a lot, because I want people to understand that that's what it means. The whole idea of the past is the past, the present is pretty elusive, what's going to happen in the future, and you need to decide, I'm going to go here instead of going there. And sometimes if you end up there somewhere along the road, you got to get back on track. But we didn't wake up one day to decide to become digital marketers. So where did you get all your experience?
No. And, you know, it's really interesting too. One of the early books on blogging, it wasn't necessarily about business blogging, but it was written by Rebecca Blood. And she says, if you write about anything for 6 months, you'll become an expert at it. And I had been started blogging in late 2003, and I got kind of attached to this whole idea of using blogs as a marketing tool, right? And I just started blogging about that. And when I went out on my own, late 2004, with a company I call Radiant Marketing Group, it was a group of 1 working out of my little apartment. And, you know, I blogged all the time about the business of blogging and using blogs as a marketing tool. And it wasn't that much later, I got a call from the Inquirer. Now, the only Inquirer I was aware of was the one in the grocery store checkout stand. And I thought, why would they be calling me? Well, it turns out it was the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is, I think, a reputable newspaper. Yep. And they were asking my opinion about business blogging in reference to some fashion shoe designer who was blogging or something, which I knew nothing about that. But I stood there with the phone in my hand, kind of looking over my shoulder going, do you have the right person? I said, how did you find out about me? And she said, well, we read your blog. It sounds like you know what you're talking about. And then that was sort of like an aha moment, like, well, hey, maybe the king has no clothes, but they don't know that. So I'm going to go with it. And that was my first, really almost I'd say first. I had a local newspaper interview me. But that was my first sort of bigger exposure just by doing what I just talked about philosophically, and that's leaning into this thing and stepping into opportunity, not knowing where it was going to take me, but finding out that if you do it, doors will open. And they continue to do that, Yvonne. To this day, they continue to do that. I mean, if it was left up to me to sell myself, I'd be on the street with a cup with pencils in it, and but because I'm a lousy salesperson, but fortunately somehow
you are. Your blog represented not only you but your knowledge, and that's what everyone wants. And they want to have these fancy terms like knowledge master or thought master or leadership.
Right, thought leader, right.
Right. And in the end, it's just this guy sitting there writing his blog and learning as he goes. I mean, one of the things that I can remember when I started my publishing company in 2005, and we went to a conference, Tom and I, to explore what it would mean to sell books in quantity. So how do you sell books in quantity? How do you get some company to buy quantity copies of a book? And one of the things he taught us was, if someone comes to you and asks you if you can do X, Y, Z, and you have never done X, Y, Z, you say yes. And then you go figure it out, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what you did.
Case. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I just wrote a blog post about robotic process automation, and I had no idea I still don't know if I knew what I was talking about, but as a client that it still wants me to work with them. So, awesome. That's the kind of world they live in. But yeah, I mean, it's all about accepting challenges, right? And if you're working for yourself, as you well know, every day is a challenge and every day is an opportunity to sort of start over in a sense. And, I mean, you can't stop selling in a sense, right? But
right, exactly.
It's just maybe a different way of doing it than, the traditional sales path, because I can't close a deal to save my soul. But fortunately, I've had opportunities that they just wanted me to do it. So
and that's really a phenomenal thing. I think people need to understand that you do sell. You just don't. You're not standing on the corner carrying a sign because you don't have to. What you're doing is exactly what all the best marketers and writers do. You write, and if you don't know it, you go out and learn it. And basically, if we're looking at where digital marketing and the digital world is going and where content marketing is going, one of the things I would like to ask you, and it's all relative to what we're talking about, is when we look at the future of content marketing, I'm a little worried because I see some lax practices in the areas of grammar and punctuation and speech. And I don't mind texting and having the, abbreviations and things, but are we losing the actual formatting of sentences and paragraphs?
That's a good question to try to answer. I mean, I think it depends on the medium you're using. Obviously, if it's
Yeah.
text, then you're going to abbreviate things, use acronyms, all that kind of stuff. I mean, formal and sort of draw a little bit of a distinction between, blogging and maybe a more formal sort of writing. If I'm writing an article for Forbes, which I've actually never done, but if I were to, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention, I think, to grammar and syntax and all of that. Although I've seen many Forbes articles that you wonder if anybody ever edited the content. But, that's the way I would approach it. If it's blogging, to me, and I think blogging, it's matured over the years. I mean, it was 2005, right? When U.S. News and World Report came out with a cover that said about the business of blogging, right? So that was kind of when the whole blogging for business purposes came into being, but it was still very much, I think I always refer to it as a speak from the heart, shoot from the hip form of communication. And in those days, it was kind of you develop your style. Mm-hmm. And if that style included poor grammar or colloquialisms or all kinds of stuff like that, so be it, right? I think, however, blogging has morphed over to a place where it's almost like you really can't tell the difference between a Forbes article and a blog post, particularly if it's written for business. So I think ultimately, while yes, to some extent, there is a loosening of the grammar morals, at the same time, I think, there is that sense of I need to make this content, as polished as it can be. Mm-hmm. Again, sort of depending on the medium. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay if somebody's writing a blog post, maybe it's a business owner. If they're not great with grammar and stuff, well, maybe they ought to be, but it's kind of okay because that's them. If I'm writing an article for a publication, that's a whole different matter. And if I'm writing a book, to me, takes it up to a whole other level. Okay. So,
well, that's good to hear, because I do hope that people writing books have editors. Sometimes I wonder. I mean, I've read a few books recently, and I read 1 or 2 books a week, that I had to wonder where the editor was or why they were.
Well, and you get into different forms of publishing, right? I mean, if you're in self-publishing, then you might write this book sans an editor, and but
could mean it doesn't present itself. It's not a polished professional product. And
I had an old editor tell me one time, never edit your own stuff and take out the word "the" as often as you can. Well, he was absolutely right. Never edit your own stuff,
I routinely take out the word "that." I don't know why we as human beings are constantly saying that. 99% of the time you remove it and it's a perfectly nice flowing sentence or paragraph. But I think if we go back and look at blogs and how they've matured, to your point, I see, because I probably look at different blogs than you do. We have a different circle that we are in, I think, online. And I'm looking at actually a lot of young women writing blogs. Either could be a cooking blog, could be a fashion blog, could be a blog about whatever interests they have, or even about business. And there is a nice voice there. So I like seeing that they have a personal voice, but I do see your point, because some of them speak a little bit less formally, and it's just, and sometimes they spell things wrong or whatever, and I cringe, but I'm learning to accept it.
Yeah, and I live in a B2B world for the most part. I don't, so yours is a different world in that respect. And I think in that respect, it's certainly in a B2C environment, you can be, really represent your own voice well, but, if in a B2B environment, maybe it's a different kind of animal.
Well, these are young women that are writing and they have advertisers and they're making money. This is their business. The blog is their business. And so the advertisers back in our day, in the early times of blogging and getting people to sponsor or pay you to write about something, it had darn well better have good grammar and punctuation and everything. But that's what I'm talking about here, is people have laxed their standards because they want that personal voice, because the readers of that blog want that person to write the way that they speak. And so the advertisers have to say, oh, we want those readers to buy our stuff, so we have to accept the blog the way it is.
Well, I mean, it is, that personal brand building, I guess. And I look back at my own blogging days, and I don't really blog for myself anymore. I don't have time. But I remember back in the earlier days, I was really trying to sort of establish my own voice. And remember, I used an ellipsis or ellipses a lot, just as if I was continuing that thought, picking it up. And I thought, okay, I like that little sort of technique. But my whole thing is, it's okay to break the rules. Just know you're breaking the rules.
Yes.
You need to know the rules before you break them, Otherwise, you end up not representing yourself well and maybe, looking a little silly.
Yeah, I agree. And I use that ellipses a lot too. And I go back and take it out. Now, I do tend to, whether it's a blog or an email, and don't let me get started on email, but I write things and then I go back and I tend in an email to make it shorter and take a whole lot of stuff out because it was totally unnecessary. But in a blog, I just go back and try to fix things like I had too many ellipses or, a misspelling, and still errors happen. I mean, it pops up. Nothing's perfect. But so if we are looking at from the days when you and I first met back 2005-ish, 2006-ish, when there was Toby and Phil Gerbershak and all these other people that we hung around with. What's different now, in your opinion? How has content marketing and blogging changed overall, in general?
Yeah, well, and all those folks went on to get real jobs, but I just think it's matured to the point that, as I said, and again, I'm not factoring in fashion blogging and all of that, because that's not a world I live in. But I think what you're seeing is a much more sort of formalized approach where there is an emphasis on, good grammar and that kind of thing, or at least an attempt to use good grammar and such. So maybe the voice is a little more homogenized. There's not the distinctiveness. Now, that's not true with everybody, obviously, but I think for the most part, if you're looking at a CEO or a CMO or some other business executive, they're probably really going to make sure that piece of content is well stated. And so, it doesn't vary that much differently than what I would think of as an article, feature article. Also, you're seeing, blogs don't do comments as much anymore, which then also, what makes that different than an article, quote unquote, a formalized kind of article, but then if you think about it, the conversation is distributed, it's dispersed, it's across social media now. It's not in a blog comment thread so much anymore. I mean, yeah, that still exists, but it's on Facebook and it's on LinkedIn and it's on all of these other places.
That's pretty profound right there. I had honestly never thought about that, but you are absolutely right. So if I'm writing a blog post and it's being put across social, it might get more attention on LinkedIn or Twitter or Pinterest or wherever it's going. I know Instagram is really big. I'm still not on Instagram very much, but anyway, that really makes sense, because back in the day we used to agonize, didn't we, over comments. Nobody's commenting on my blog.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, we didn't have all these other avenues, did we? I mean, I guess there was Friendster and things like that, but it was
Oh.
only around 2005 and 6 and 7 that these things began to develop. But I don't know. I just sort of feel like the way I look at blogging is it's sort of the seedbed for idea germination. I still look at it that way. I used to really look at it that way. And that, when I would think about writing a blog post, it would be like, oh, I got this idea. I want to get it down quickly, have it there available to reflect back on, and maybe I'll do a series, or maybe I'll use it as fodder for something else. Now, and this is another distinction, everything is done with Google in mind. I don't know that we thought about it from an SEO standpoint back in those days, but everything's done with Google in mind. And blog posts now are typically anywhere from 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 words. So you can't just sit down and whip out a blog post quickly in 20, 30 minutes and, be done with it. And back in those days, our early days, it was more, again, speak from the heart, shoot from the hip, less editorially sort of, finessed. And now it's again, very much, okay, got to have the structure. I've got to use H1 tags and 2 tags, and I need to think about, readability and scannability. So I need to put some things in bullet points, and I need to keep the paragraphs short and sort of chunky, and, all of those things that Jacob Nielsen, the web usability guy, talks about, and which he talked about way back in the 90s, but we didn't necessarily think about those things back in the early days. It was really a form of self-expression, getting something off my chest, maybe educating, teaching, maybe it's, how-to stuff, but it's evolved to, again, very much more, I think, formalized, SEO optimized, all of those ized things. And, is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, but it is nice every once in a while when you read somebody and you just know that that's them, that's their voice. If you read it, I mean, there's so many blog posts that you read them, and if you didn't know who the author was, it would be just like so many other blog posts. But then you take a Seth Godin, I always think of Seth's content, which he writes, I think, about every day. He's sort of my secular devotional, because he writes in a way that is so representative of Seth Godin. I mean, when you read it, you just kind of know that's Seth talking, right? Yeah. And I think there's plenty of room for that. And in a B2B world, certainly plenty of room for that, whether people are taking advantage of it or not. And if I ever get back to it on my own, I don't actually know what I would even talk about, but, maybe who needs another blog on social media? I don't know that the world needs another one. So maybe I'd do something differently altogether. But, I think I would try to establish my voice so that people would identify that content with me, but I'm less focused on trying to build a brand, a Paul Chaney brand anymore. There was a time when I was interested in doing that.
Well, I think this has been fabulous. We're coming to the end of our time. When we look at the progression of blogs and blogging and writing on the web, I really like the way that you're talking about how, in the B2B world, it sort of is a little more polished. However, there is still room for voice. There's still room for you to be you if you're brave enough to do it. And maybe that's what's wrong, is people aren't brave enough, is they think that this is a business blog, so I have to do it this way. I have to write it as if it's a Forbes article. Well, there are people out there who aren't. A lot of the young kids that I read coming up that are doing business on the web, they're very, interesting and crazy, and they do all sorts of things that you and I would be like, wow, and it's fun. They make it fun. So I'm hoping we're going to see more fun alongside of the professional, because I still like the professional.
Well, I mean, I think sort of in a final word, it's really moved away from the written word as much and more toward oral. Now we have Clubhouse. So there's, audio social or social audio, maybe that's the term. And podcasting obviously has come back and is huge again. So that may be where you're hearing the unique voices speaking, not so much in the written format anymore.
I mean, we could talk podcasting because I don't think it ever took off that big back in the day. It was popular to a point, but now it's huge. And people because people can do other things while they listen. That's what I'm told.
Right.
So, well, anyway, we have to end today, but maybe we could talk podcasting if you're game for it another time. At this point, I just am so happy to have a chance to talk with you and bring you to my audience. It's a small audience, but I want them to have other voices. I want them to hear from like a bigger group than just the small little pick and choose things that I do. So when I saw what you were doing and that you were willing to be on camera with me, I couldn't refuse.
Well, I don't have a voice for radio or a face for camera, TV, is the old saying, but hey, I'm happy to share what little I know. I learned it the hard way for the most part, and everything I know really about digital marketing, I learned from For Dummies books over here.
Yeah, well, Dummies books, see them behind you, and your books. And Paul, this was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for being on Smart Conversations.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you.